So you're opening up your disk management and you look in your C drive here. This main disk has this weird recovery partition. You're like, wait a second, I didn't make a recovery partition. What is that? Well, that's what this video is about. It's called ReAgentC. It's a great utility that I think every Windows user should know about because it will help you recover your system in case something bad happens. But inevitably, sometimes it gets corrupted, it breaks, or let's say you're a silly user and you're just like, hey, I delete this partition using like, gparted or some other partitioning tool and get rid of it, and you want it back after you figure out, hey, this is a good thing to have on every system. Now, I will take a couple shots at Windows. It wouldn't be me making a Microsoft Windows video if I didn't take a couple shots. I hate the fact they toss it at the end of the drive. I will say that it always has to be at the end of the drive. I've never seen a working ReAgentC partition at the start of the drive. Obviously, at the very beginning, that's your boot partition. Then the meat and potatoes of the drive's actually in the middle. I think the reason why they do that is because if you don't have enough space for recovery partition, it's pretty easy to get into here and shrink your existing C partition to add like a gig. I would say if you're going to do this and you're going to make the recovery partition using this guide, take about a gig off of your C drive and just shrink at the very end of the space. What that would look like is we would shrink this by a gig and we give that to the recovery partition. But in this instance, we don't have to because it's already here. We'll pull up our PowerShell. Oh, wait a second. I haven't made my PowerShell good. I'm going to just run my script real fast. We're going to make this a little prettier. And I'm just going to clone this. If you're interested in this, I did make a how-to article. And also I made a video on the last one. But having said that, I'm going to do it real quick. So now that we have our prettier PowerShell, let's get into looking at the partitions in here and ReAgentC recovery. For this, we need to use something called diskpart. Now you could do this from recovery media. You can do it from a lot of different ways, but today we're just going to use PowerShell, launch into what's called diskpart. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Okay, now that we have diskpart open, we're going to first list our disks. So we'll do list disk. Okay, what do we have here? I obviously have a lot of hard disks in this system. You're probably only going to see one, maybe two. I just so happen to have 7. First, we need to figure out which disk number this is. Look back at our disk management and just click on the C drive. It usually takes you down. It says disk 5. And that's a 232. Disk 5, 232. And this free 1024K. That's perfect. That's exactly what we have. As usually Windows drives, especially main drives, like to give up about 1 meg, which is 1024K, where most other operating systems utilize the full disk. So now we can select that disk. We're just going to go select disk 5. You can actually start chopping off letters, and there's shorthand here. So if you're looking at different guides, just something good to know about diskpart. Now we list our partitions, and we should see 3 here. And you can see we have system, which is our boot one. We have primary, which is where most of our data is. And then we have recovery all the way down here. So obviously we're going to be working with the partition of recovery. But if we don't have this partition, let's say, or detail R, and you can see exactly what the detail of this partition you have currently selected is. And there's some really neat things that happen in this detail that we need to first talk about. Now, if you're using an MBR, which is a really old system, this is going to be, the type is usually going to be like 7. Or if it's a recovery partition and it's an MBR, this is going to be 27. So kind of an important thing. UEFI adds a bunch. I don't know why it's this giant string of letters. I guess Microsoft logic. But they moved it from, when it comes to MBR, into this. It's going to be this long string for the recovery partition. Now, if this does end in like 9C7 for the type instead of the 6AC, I know it's weird remembering these numbers, but just remember this. 6AC, I always think of like air conditioning. 9C7, for some odd reason, C4 pops into my head, but 9C7 I can remember. But 9C7 is a regular UEFI partition. 6AC is basically your recovery partition. So Why I'm kind of staying on the type, because if this type is wrong, the recovery won't work. So it's kind of one thing that most guides miss. What we're going to do now is delete it, because let's just nuke this entire recovery partition and then recreate it. So the first thing we can do is use ReAgentC. So we're going to exit this and we're going to go ReAgentC. We're going to go disable. And then we're actually not an elevated prompt. Let's come over here and try ReAgentC disable. Perfect. So now we've disabled the recovery partition. Before we can re-enable it, we need to make sure we have the proper recovery environment, also known as WinRE. And this is actually located in the Windows directory, System32, and I believe recovery directory as well. And you can see it would be all right here. Now, I don't see anything here, which I'm going to just go into here and just make sure. So where do we get winre.wim? And that's just from Windows install media. Go over into our drive. We don't have it here, but you know what? I think I have an image with our Windows. All right, while we grab that ISO, I'll be right back. I'm going to go grab some more coffee. Well, while we wait, I do have new t-shirts down there. So if you want a little coffee loading t-shirt down there, really good quality from Bonfire. So check it out from the mount. So let's just come over to H drive. Our Win install should be in our sources directory. So let's paste our DISM. We're just mounting our install.wim file, and then sources / and then install.wim. This should mount it to our temp directory. If it's too much trouble for you, what you could also do is just come into our mounted ISO image, because it is an ISO. I could see how it wouldn't have proper permissions in that regard. We're just going to grab the install.wim file right here. Let's just copy that. We're going to put this in a drive. You can put this in your C drive. It doesn't matter. So now it's going to be d:install.wim, and I'm extracting it to a directory. So we extracted the install.wim file from our CD-ROM, copied it to our local hard disk. We created a temp folder in that local hard disk, and we're referencing it and exporting it now. All right, now we're done with the mounting and extracting. If we look in the temp directory, we should see a ton of different files. So if we go into temp, oh, here we go. Perfect. Let's go into recovery now from C Windows. And there that file is. Perfect. There, we copy this. And honestly, I would copy both these XML files and here, and we can actually paste this in. And you'll see that there's actually already a WinRE.wim file. It is a system file completely hidden from us, but we could actually just override whatever's there. So now doing a listing, we can actually see we have the WinRE reagent, and we are ready to re-enable our recovery. Now, typically, your recovery will have this WinRE and reagent file here. I just wanted to show you the long way, basically, of copying all this over in case you are missing it. So now we could actually re-enable WinRE, but first I want to blow out all these partitions and just change it. So let's do a disk part again. This time, let's delete partitions and start from scratch, because I kind of wanted to show that aspect of it as well. Let's do a list disk. I think it was disk 5, right? Yep. Disk 5, cell, disk 5, list part. You can see our recovery partition still there. We're going to select the partition 3. You can do a detail par, see more of the detail. Yes, that's our recovery partition. Everything looks healthy. Let's delete it. And of course, in typical Windows fashion, they say force, which really what they mean is override. So del par override should successfully delete the partition. Why they don't say you need to override it instead of forcing it? Well, again, Microsoft logic. So now if we list our partitions, you'll see that we don't have all those partitions there anymore, and we need to create a new partition. Now, if you don't have space for the new partition, and let's say you pull up your disk management, you go to your C drive and you're like, okay, if you don't have at least 600 megs here, you need to shrink this partition and then move forward. But we obviously have space. We can do a create par, this command right here. This creates a primary partition. The size is 665, which I don't even know, do we have 665? Let's take a look at our disk management or C drive. Actually 605, so that should be 605. The ID is this. Now, if you're using MBR, this would be ID 27. But since we're using UEFI or GPT, this is actually going to be needing the 6AC. So kind of an important detail here. We'll hit enter. It created that. We'll list the partition. Perfect. Everything looks great here. And if we actually look at our disk management now, you can see this 605 partition is just shown up, which is awesome. But let's take a detail look and make sure that, okay, this is good. It's hidden, required no, attribute 0. Okay, everything here looks pretty good, but the file system is raw right now. And this should be NTFS. So what we're going to do, format it to NTFS, quick, and then label it WinRE. It's not quite the same label as what we just deleted, but I want to really specify, hey, this is a Windows RE partition I created. And there's something special we need to do. We'll assign it a letter, and then we're also going to assign it a special GPT attribute, because you see the attribute right here is 0. If we scroll up, you notice the attribute up here when we deleted this partition was, it should have been 1. So we need to fix that. This is what it should be, and this is currently what it is. Not quite the same. So now we have that. Let's do another detail par and see what this looks like now. Looking a lot better. We have the type, hidden yes, required yes, attribute 1. Everything is looking pretty darn good. Now we can start copying files and setting up this recovery partition. The easy way, sometimes this just works right out of the box, ReAgentC, and then just typing enable. A lot of times this goes and finds the partition and does it all correctly, which when that happens, it's magical. So if we look at our Z partition, the cool thing is we can see it copied that big Windows RE file, because there's only 80 megs free, because that RE file's around 510, 520 megs. And that's how we know it worked. If it doesn't show anything in the Z file, well, it didn't work. So what do you do? And this is just a Stack Overflow article. I'll put it in my christitus.com article when I publish it with the time of this video. But basically what we need to do is make a recovery directory and a Windows RE directory in that base Z drive, that Windows RE drive. And then we copy with the -H flag, because Windows RE is hidden. You know, earlier when we did that listing and it didn't show Windows RE.wim, the reason was we didn't have that hidden flag on. And we copy it from that recovery directory on System32 directly to this one. And then when we go to do that enable, it's actually setting the RE image to this path and then enabling it. So you're really specifying and saying, hey, Windows, you're dumb, you can't find my file. You do that. This is an optional step only for those systems that this doesn't work on. And that's why I kind of grabbed this article, just to show it for when you really need to trick it and really need to hack in and there's something wrong with the system and Windows ReAgentC is just not working. I think I used this method when I was booting from install media and doing like a Shift F10 to grab a command prompt and then setting it up manually. That's one instance where a lot of times ReAgentC will not work because it's not in a live environment or it's not in an actual booted Windows install. So sometimes you need to specify the path, and usually that's when you boot into a broken system and you're trying to do all this on a broken system. ReAgentC enable sometimes doesn't work unless you really specify what's going on. But I wanted to show this method, even though I didn't use it today. But yeah, and we'll remove the volume Z before our reboot as well. With that partition selected, we just type remove, and that just removes the drive letter. Exit out, and then when we pull up our file, you'd see drive Z doesn't exist anymore, so we're good. All right, so everything's set up. All our files are there. We're ready to boot into our boot partition. How do we boot into it? There's a couple different methods. One, you could fail the boot 3 times. This will force it to go into a recovery partition if it exists in Windows. 2, you could go to our start command, hold shift, and then while holding shift, I'm holding shift right now, and it's rebooting, it'll go, okay, I notice you're holding shift. I need to boot into the boot partition. And on startup, you should see a please wait. And if we did it right, we should get a recovery environment under advanced, which it does look promising. Another way to do it, a third way I kind of want to mention, but this way doesn't work by stock defaults because Microsoft hates you, and that is they removed the F8 option on startup. It used to be on Windows 7 and before, you'd hit F8 and you could boot into safe mode, you could boot into a recovery environment, you could boot all this just by pressing F8. But apparently it's a security issue. For us that troubleshoot PCs, it really sucks that they removed this option, but you can actually add it back in. And if you run my toolbox, I'm actually going to add this option back in as a stock tweak because I think every system should have that. It just makes them so much easier to work on, but it is a tweak that you have to make to get that F8 option back. Having said that, now that we're in a recovery environment, we want to go to troubleshoot. And from here, advanced options. Reset will literally just delete out your entire Windows install while keeping, I think, maybe your My Documents. So use that with caution. Startup repair never works usually. You can run it like startup repair. I think out of the 100 times I've run startup repair, it may have worked once or twice, but don't rely on that. Startup settings. This is kind of an interesting one where you could actually boot into safe mode. I don't know why they rename this startup settings as just hitting restart will boot you into safe mode. I wish they would just called it safe mode, but startup settings, safe mode, kind of one and the same when Windows 10, Windows 11. Command prompt, that's obviously where we live in our recovery environment. Uninstall updates. This is beautiful when Microsoft inevitably gives you a bad update, or if you use my toolbox and you are delaying your updates a little bit so you get more quality updates. You probably don't run into this too often, but you can actually uninstall the last update. If we go into this menu, you can uninstall the last quality update or the last feature update. I have a video coming out soon. 22H2 is a nightmare. That is a good way to roll back from 22H2. Be watching for that if you do run into a bad feature update and it upgrades a whole bunch of stuff and you're having issues like, let's say, TLS, SSL issues like 22H2. You're having problems with your printer because 22H2 broke it. Uninstall the last feature update. That's a good one. Or if it was just a quality update. These days, quality updates don't usually break systems that much. It's usually the feature updates. So that's uninstall updates. UEFI firmware settings. If you click this boots into your BIOS. And you might be like, why does this exist? Why not hit like delete or F2? Certain laptops, it's actually kind of a pain to get into their BIOSes. This is a way to actually get into the BIOS through another method. So it's kind of nice. System restore, this is a good way to reset some settings. So usually restore points are done when you install new programs and new drivers, run certain utilities, a restore point is created. This helps you revert back in time. I caution you from using this for anything that's really old. Reverting more than a day or two, a lot of times ends up with kind of like a cobbled together weird system. So be careful with using too much or leaning too hard on system restore. A day or two with just a couple revisions is fine, and it does a pretty decent job. But anything like really old or really old restore point typically will cause things to break. But let's focus on the command prompt now, because this is where all the real tools of the recovery environment comes in. From here, we have like copy files or copy command, which if you do /? It'll give you a lot of options. So if you're copying files, this is a great way to grab your files. Let's say you're about to do something dumb or possibly damaging the system. You obviously want to copy those files first. So plug in your thumb drive, copy those files with the copy command. Pretty self-explanatory. The next one is check disk, CHK, DSK, and we're just doing a /? This scans your disks for errors. It can be very nice if you're having problems or you need to fix a certain partition. And then we have like SFC scan now, which I'll run. This runs a verification, a system verification check on the whole system and says, hey, is there any bad files? Now, SFC itself isn't great, but if we cancel out of that and we do like a DSIM, this is where we specify the image. So this would be the first thing we put as the option. Now, normally this would be like D:/ for your USB or your CD-ROM with those install.wim files. Now, I made that temp directory that has the sources and the install.wim file. So I'll use that for this example because I've already extracted that. But if you don't, just know that you need that USB drive or CD-ROM from the official Windows ISO. And then we do clean up image and restore health. So something like this should go in and do it. Now, I'm running into an error that the image is not valid, so I need to specify a little bit more of that. For this video, I'm not going to do that, but I wanted to show these two options are very powerful from the command prompt to do it. And the last thing I wanted to show you in the command prompt that's a great asset to troubleshoot a system or maybe even change something in the system is just simply using ReAgentC. You could change all the Windows registry and a lot of, let's say, a bad key that got entered, whatever it might be, you could actually get in here and change it, which is so very nice. And with that, that is the Windows recovery environment in ReAgentC. Hopefully this helps you. I know there was a lot of people that just didn't even know this existed or were unsure of some of the nuances of the recovery partition, but very nice for getting a functional Windows system. Let's say it gets broken for whatever reason. Very easy to restore the health. I think so many people de facto reinstall Windows. Don't do that. Just use this.